Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio once again for my show this evening, which is going to be an interesting one because I want to talk about what is good teaching and has the idea of good teaching changed. And obviously, as part of that, we'll try and also talk about the video which Pritesh Roy Chora released a couple of weeks ago, where he showcased some of his teaching, and it caused quite a stir. And it certainly, for me, it was something that I found really interesting and something that I spent a fair bit of time reflecting on, because it raised some questions for me. It raised some interesting thoughts for me. And yeah, I found it really, really interesting. So we're going to talk through the video in some way, shape or form in terms of what was contained in it. And I've got Zeenat, who is also going to be hopefully joining me, and I'm just going to invite her in at the moment to discuss this topic with me live. So yeah, I'm hoping to go through the particulars of that video. Now, I understand that just for anybody listening to this as a podcast on Teachers Talk Radio, you may be wondering, what the heck am I talking about? Well, a couple of weeks ago, a science teacher called Pritesh released a video of him teaching in a science classroom, and the video demonstrated, I guess, a snippet of direct instruction. In the original video that was shared, Pritesh described direct instruction as joyful, leads pupils to success. And in the clip, you see things like the checking for listening, rehearsal, checking for understanding, ruler reading, turn and talk, slant, and so on and so on, right? And the clip itself lasted about 2.5 minutes, but it was part of a bigger clip that was shared across X originally. So if you're listening to this off X, I apologize, but you can find it on there even just by Googling it. You don't need an X account to watch that. So anyway, that if you can hear that rain, by the way, that there's some pretty mad rain where I am. So apologies for that if you can hear that in the background. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. So anyway, let's get into this. Let's get into this video. And as I say, I've hopefully got Zeenat with me in a moment to discuss it as well. But just while we're waiting for Zeenat to connect in, let me go through sort of some of the thoughts on this, including my own, and some of the questions which I actually had on this video as well. So the first thing that came to my mind is the way that I was trained to teach, and the way that I have developed a view on what good teaching is and looks like over my sort of 18-year career, and particularly in the formative years of my career, the first, 5 years or whatever of my career, which would have been like 2007 to 2012, let's say. And the clip that was shared by Pritesh, probably, I'm not suggesting it would have been the opposite of what sort of good teaching would have been seen as back then, but it certainly wouldn't have been a match to that impression back then, to that interpretation back then. And it's an interesting one, because when I asked, and I garnered some other thoughts on this to find out what other people thought. And, you only have to look online. There's a heck of a lot of positive commentary on it, saying, a lot of things in terms of the routine, the structure, the style, the delivery, the knowledge of the teacher, the power of the explanations. You could go on and on, right? There's loads and loads of positive commentary. There's also some negative commentary. I actually reached out to a few people who are current teachers. One is a senior leader, and a couple of other teachers that I know, to find out what they thought, right? And this is a quote from one of them, what they said. They said it was performative, awful, staged, and robotic, but each to their own. And they said, I have my own children deliberately in schools not like that. And they asked, where is the skill of the teacher? That's not skill or talent. That's a cover teacher with a script. And it's personally a no from me. And they continued. They said, it's a fallacy presented here that the kids are perfectly behaved and do what they're told. And people want to believe that. It does not allow for individuality or creativity on the part of the staff or students. It's formulaic, it's a fad, and it's an advert to try and get people to go into teaching where they learn a behaviour script and content script, and they can never deviate as they don't know how to deal with something different or off script. That's what they said, right? This person I reached out to. I compared that to the commentary online, which was pretty much the opposite of that in many cases. Many people were saying that it was, I'm not sure I saw the phrase groundbreaking, but I saw plenty saying it was sort of right at the cutting edge. Let's say that in terms of teaching. Now, that's some of the views I've seen and I've garnered. The questions I asked, for me, this is me personally speaking, I do wonder about the sort of the creative side of being a teacher and what that means and what that looks like. I also wondered, a question I had was about behaviour and what is good behaviour. I think behaviour has got tougher to manage in schools, and I think particular methods of teaching have a better chance of success to gain, if you like, compliant behaviour from more students. However, I also sort of caveat that and ask questions about, what good behaviour looks like and what good behaviour is, of which that they would be questions I was posing while I was watching. I was saying, what does engagement mean? Is successful engagement somebody responding to a sort of call for them to respond? Or is engagement, there will be some out there who say, well, that is engagement, but it's not true engagement. True engagement is where there is more of a sort of a conversation or a more, I don't know what words I'm looking for here, maybe a more voluntary sort of participation in something, right? So I found all of that interesting when it came to the behavior. And in terms of the teaching techniques, I personally sort of, and I did an interview last year with Phil Beadle about slant, and he asked me what I thought about slant. I have no problem with any teaching technique. The question I would ask is how many of number one, how many of these techniques are new? Turn and talk, for example. Well, in 2007, that probably would have been taught to your partner for a minute, and and obviously the teacher may have inverted a structure around that, like you're not allowed to do this, or make sure you do that, or whatever, right? So, is that a problem? No, it's not. I think it's just, I don't even know if that needs saying, or if it's even relevant to say that a lot of strategies pre were already there. So anyway, I'm throwing out a lot of ideas here. I'm going to bring in my amazing guest in a minute to give me their opinion. Before I do that, just a quick thank you to our sponsors on the show tonight. That is John Catt Educational, who are leading providers and publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools. And you can visit johncattbookshop.com and you can check that out. And you can use JCTTR2425 to get 20% off any and all books on the John Catt website. We also have USA Study. If any of your students are interested in studying in the USA, post 16 or post 18, then check out USA Study, usastudy.co.uk. This is to help students who want to get scholarships, who want to go into the USA post 18. It doesn't matter the sort of financial context around them. There are opportunities there to study in the USA. And our final shout is for Teachers Talk Connect, which is happening on Saturday, the 1st of March. So if you're a teacher and you're based in the Northwest, come along to Teachers Talk Connect because it is free and it's on the 1st of March and it's in Manchester and we have 50 plus speakers in loads of different subject areas. So if you're missing that, you must be mad. Right, Zena, can you unmute yourself? Hello,
Yes.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening to you. Did you hear my rambling monologue?
I did. I got bits and bobs.
Well, there you go. I want to ask you first of all, did you watch the clip of Pritesh teaching?
Yeah, so kind of like unironically, we watched it in a recent CPD session at the school that I work in, but also it kind of like had a viral moment, so it came up on my feed when it first got released as well.
Yeah.
So I've seen it in 2 different contexts.
Okay.
But
okay, brilliant. So what are your thoughts then on the clip? Talk me through
it. After let me just gather my thoughts for 1 second. So when I first saw it, I thought it was a good lesson. I think because I did my teacher training about 6 years ago now, it's a lot of things that we were being taught when we were training in 2020, in like the peak of COVID. But also in terms of the school that I work in, it was exactly the same as what they expect in terms of how the lessons run.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of I say you say, so on and so forth. But also I think with my personal teaching style, that's not how I'd run a lesson. Because my idea of compliance is I should be able to give you the instruction, then you should be able to do the task. But also I don't need every single hand up. So I do a lot of, if you have an answer, can you raise your hand? But then I might not call on that person.
But isn't that what he was doing in that clip?
Yeah, although there were a lot of hands up in his, and I think it's just like the explicitness of, if you have your idea, put your hand up, but then also like having a scan and purposely choosing someone.
Yeah, I mean the whole. So again, one of the I think I could be wrong here because I'm not an expert on sort of TLAC techniques, but I think one of them is called like all hands up or something. There's something along those lines, right? Where you're looking for sort of engagement / compliance for all, and that I guess that's where like a mini whiteboard technique would come in.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is like the no hands down thing. I completely like. Yeah, great. The bit that stood out to me was the bit myself, I would struggle if you said to me as a teacher, follow this script and get the kids to also follow the script, because I personally would be questioning. I would struggle because I would find it probably a little bit awkward. Others wouldn't. This is just me speaking personally, because I would find it a little bit too performative, maybe for me personally. But I also get it because children need routines, and these are routines that all children can access. I guess on the flip side to that, as I say, there will be many out there who will say it's a little like the comment I read at the beginning from somebody I reached out to and asked their opinion on it. There'll be many who will say it's too mechanical. Do you like this? This is obviously these are very popular techniques. These are techniques that are being used in more and more schools. Has my overarching question is, has the idea of what good teaching is changed? Because as I said at the beginning, when I trained in 2007-8, that clip would not have been considered good teaching. It may have been considered to have elements of good teaching, like for example, they may have looked at that and said the behaviour is good. But in terms of like that whole idea of the sort of children, back in the late, I guess, 2007-10, it was like the children leading the learning was like the sort of the like sanctimony of teaching. It was the best thing. It was the thing to aim for, was the children leading the learning. You could argue that clips like that are the opposite of that. Anyway, you tell me what you think.
Oh, so I think I agree. I think students like these days, they need quite a lot of routine. But then I think a lot of what I hear personally from senior leaders is they've had 2 years of COVID. They've lost kind of like the rigorous routine. We need to re-embed it. These are kids who have lost this much time to COVID. So they didn't have that structure and that rigorous routine almost from us as teachers because they were at home and they were sitting and they were doing whatever they wanted whilst they were on teams. But also at the same time, I know that when I was in school, I was in secondary school in 2007. So it's been a while now. But
Yeah.
like if I think of it from when I was in school, same thing, that wouldn't be what a lesson would typically look like. Because my teachers when I was in school were very big on you guys lead us and then if you need our support, we'll jump in and we'll help you. But also I think in that clip, for me, like inquiry based or inquisitive learning is quite important. So because I teach social sciences, we have tasks where we might set them off to research a change in society or a change in psychology that they need to know as a part of their essays or their exam knowledge. And for me, that much routine and that much rigor doesn't always, what's the word? It doesn't always sit well with me because I think freedom for students is also important. So I think it's good to have the rigorous routines in place, but I think in that clip specifically, it's taken away kind of like the ownership of learning for students a little bit.
Is that though a response to like what you might see as, and if you look at surveys from various different organizations, most teachers say that behavior has been on the slide. So when you look at a classroom like that and a structure and a setup like that, that will lead to, in inverted commas, better behavior, right? In my view. Now, it may not be, because I think as teachers, I think you ask the majority of teachers, and if you said to a teacher, right, what if you could have any behavior that you wanted in a classroom, in a mainstream classroom with 20 students, 25 students, they would probably say, oh, wouldn't it be lovely if we could just have like that university seminar style behavior where everybody is just absolutely sort of mature enough and engaged enough and interested enough and on board enough where that's sort of just the behavior that happens. Most teachers like that would be amazing. Most teachers would say that. Now, we know as mainstream teachers that doesn't usually happen unless you are in a particularly lucky context or a quite individual context. For example, I worked in a special school recently where the class sizes were sometimes say 10, right? And that lends itself to maybe having a better chance of creating an environment like that. There's no guarantee. But let's say, for example, you have 30 in the class, it's a mainstream school. You then have, I guess, choices to make in terms of how you're going to achieve the best possible behavior within your context. And there would be many who would argue, and I would completely sort of go along with this idea, that that way of doing things might give you a better chance of having better behavior. And I use that better behavior term loosely because there will be many who will say, well, what is better behavior? But better behavior on paper, on the surface, that strategy may give you a better chance of doing that than, say, for example, a teacher comes in and they say, my methodology is going to be discovery and inquiry learning. Now, if you want to go down that approach, personally, I see nothing wrong with that idea. What my questions always come with, how does it translate into the classroom? Because if you look at those two approaches, like the one in the video, and say a classroom that is built around discovery or inquiry learning, I know which one as a new teacher I would have struggled more with to get the sort of behavior that I would want to get. And I guess in some ways it is maybe a response to the behavior standards across society and across schools, sort of, not in every school, but over the board, maybe it is sort of declining. Maybe it's declined in the last 5 years or whatever. That's what all the surveys say. So some will say, well, that is a response to that. But, in an ideal world, if you said to me, look, this is the way the behavior is going to be in this class. So if you said to me, right, you've got a class of 25, and obviously this is never going to happen, but let's imagine what the behavior is going to be like. So someone says to you, the behavior in this class is going to be exemplary, literally exemplary. You will have no classroom management concerns whatsoever. What approach do you want to take to teaching? I think that I would choose discovery and inquiry learning in that context. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Whereas if you said to me, no, actually, there's going to be, some normal, if you like, it's going to be a normal class within the context of mainstream schools, and you had to choose between a full-on inquiry or discovery-based classroom versus something much more sort of teacher-led, I would choose the teacher-led option, because I would say, well, I've got a better chance with this. Now, obviously, that would depend on your experience level as a teacher. However, what I don't personally necessarily buy into is that way is the best way to teach, full stop. Right?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. So I'm not saying it's not a way to teach, and I'm not suggesting that it can't be a better way in context to teach. But the idea that it is a better way to teach when all the conditions are outstanding to teach, I don't know. That's you tell me what you think of that, because I've gone off on one there a bit.
No, it's all right. I was just listening and absorbing what you were saying.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely an example of one way to teach really well. But I think, again, like you said, depending on the experience and kind of like where somebody is at in their career, it might not work for them, or there might be a variation of that works better for them in their classroom. But also, it depends on the context of the school and the students that you're teaching. So I've worked in state schools and private schools. I've worked in the UAE before as well. And every single school that I've worked in, the same routines don't work in every single one. Yeah. So, like, for example, the school that I'm in right now, really rigorous routines. We do narrated countdowns. We do a lot of everybody eyes on me, look at the board, sit up straight so that you can focus. And then the first school that I worked at, where I did my training, it wasn't as rigorous because the kids had a routine, but then they would struggle if it was almost like over routine. So if it was as narrated as that video was, those kids would struggle with that because they appreciated almost like the freedom that they had in the lessons to discover and inquire about things on their own. But then when I worked in the private school, I didn't need to be as almost as on it with behavior because their parents were obviously paying a fee. So the behavior was better because they knew that if they were messing around, their parents would get a phone call and then they'd have a conversation at home. Whereas like, we're paying this much money, why are you messing around? Type of thing. But then, like I said, that video is a really good example of something that works here. But then if I tried to do that when I was in the UAE, that wouldn't work because the context of those schools and those kids is completely different to what it is here. But I think what works really well, given the current climate in education and behavior, I think narrating what you're doing works really well. And you saw that in the video. But also being as explicit as he was with your instructions, I think that works really well.
Oh, yeah. No, it's fantastic. I mean, the sort of style of the tone. Let's say that the tone, the was just in my view, the pitch was just perfect. It was like it wasn't sort of silly or OTT. It wasn't too quiet. It wasn't too sort of casual. It was just pitched at that perfect sort of friendly business tone level. So the like you said, the explicit nature of the instructions and the explanations, perfect. I think the bits where I was really interested was sort of the way people respect. I don't know, like the style of doing things is something you would like, not you would, but people might associate with like a school in 1900, right? I'm not saying that's a bad thing, by the way, but that sort of rote learning and the sort of way in which that was structured, someone might look at that and say that's maybe more similar to a lesson that might have taken place 50 years ago. I'm not saying that in a negative sense. It's literally just, because actually there were many good things about, whatever era of teaching you wanted to look at, right? So it's not saying it in a critical sense, but what I find interesting is that sort of not re-emergence, because it's always been there, but sort of the presentation of that way of doing things. I find that really interesting, of saying this is now sort of innovation. It's research based. It's the way, the truth, and the light. You know what I mean? Like, I find that interesting. Coming back to what I said earlier, I mean, I wanted to ask you, Zeenat, because the clip's interesting in a sense that there'll also be sort of technologists, for example, who will say, well, does an approach like that take into account the rise in technology or personalized learning or whatever? Does that like go with that innovation that's happened in that space? Should it? Because there will be many out there who will say no, like either block the technology out completely or only use technology where it's going to either add value or help in the classroom, right? But I wondered, with AI and all the rest of it, the way development is going, the way learning is going, take outside of school more as an example. How do you see that fitting with that, sitting with it?
I think in terms of technology, in the example in the video, I personally, I can't see like AI or anything fitting into it very well, because I feel like it'd be a bit difficult to slot something related to technology into it. However, at the same time, I don't know, maybe it could work really, really well if you did try and add in AI. But at the same time, in the kind of like in the same breath, my question always is, does technology take away from the skills that we're trying to develop in students? So like in my last school, we did quite a lot of independent work where students would use their iPads or their laptops to do research tasks, or they'd have to use AI or something to create something for us to look at in the lesson. And I think, in my personal experience, that's always taken away from the lesson a little bit. But I think that's because maybe I'm old school, even though I'm not from like an old school teaching generation in inverted commas. But I quite prefer them to sit there and like read a textbook or read a piece of writing as opposed to using AI to generate something.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question
No,
entirely.
it does. It does. I mean, that was why I asked it, really. I mean, I'm not necessarily sold on one way or the other on that, because I just think, sort of good teaching is good teaching. I mean, tech can really help and support that, but I do think there's sort of something to ask in the future around this idea of personalized learning, even though, I think it may be a fallacy in terms of, in a mainstream classroom, how personalized learning can truly be achieved. But I do think technology can move you in a direction, if you have the facility for it. But of course, there will be those out there who will say, well, by moving in that direction, you might lose some of those structures, routines, behaviors that are so valuable and that parents also want the students to have. So I think that's a really interesting one. I noticed one commentary on it from Adrian Bethune, who said that he didn't think, I'm going to paraphrase him because I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something along the lines of, I don't see much joy in this clip, right? So he was saying in Pritesh's original commentary, he had used the word joy, and Adrian said that he didn't see any joy in it, right? Any thoughts on that?
I think it depends. Like, some students will present joy in a different way. Maybe for the students in that school, in that context, joy is being sat there quite silent, attentive, looking at the board, doing everything that's being narrated to them. In other contexts, it might be that the kids, you can almost like see them buzzing with energy when they're in the room. I personally wouldn't say that there was an element of a lack of joy. I think they were enjoying the lesson. I think you just can't see it as obviously as you would if it was a lesson where the kids, like, you could like almost see it bouncing around the room. But I think that's because of the rigorous routine that's been embedded.
Yeah, no, absolutely, it makes perfect sense. The reason I asked, I guess joy is absolutely sort of made from the beholder of the observer, because you can that's where I sort of would maybe disagree with Adrian, in the sense that you can be joyful but not express it in the way that is perhaps perceived as the norm by society, if that makes sense. Beaming and smiling and sort of being very interactive, that may mean you are joyful, but equally it may mean that you're faking it until you make it. And the reverse can also be true, of course. So I don't know. It's an interest, but I got the point. When you sort of look at, I don't know, I've seen clips of primary school teachers who've shared clips of kids sort of conga dancing down corridors and singing songs and being, clapping and whatever, and chanting and singing, whatever. You see one of those, you say that's joyful. Yeah, sure. So I suppose that presents a different picture of what joyful means. Whether you would believe that to be joyful, I guess, would come down to your own sort of take on it. It is interesting, though, that use of the word joy, because again, I think there are so many sort of interpretations out there of what that looks like and what that is. Can you find deep joy in a sense, in the sense that you are learning stuff? I would argue yes. Will that be visible? Possibly not. Or it may not be expressed in a classroom space. Now, for example, I can think of students I've taught who might be in a class and have an absolute face on them for 10 lessons in a row, but then maybe either at home, or maybe their parents come to parents' evening and say, John's really feels like they're really enjoying it, that they're if you like, joyful about the learning, right? But you're not necessarily going to see that. So I do sort of, I can see both sides on that, but I just think that again, it's this observer culture. And I was going to ask you about that, actually. Do you think that that any clip, so for example, if I sort of wanted to do this, Zena, but it would be probably a nightmare. But let's imagine I said to my current school now, listen, film me teaching for a week, but don't miss anything out. Don't miss anything out. Just film it unedited. So that would be like, what, I don't know, 50 hours of content or something, of the same classroom, maybe different kids, but sort of a teacher like me doing the job over a week. Now, to be fair, Pritesh's classroom may look like that the whole rest of the time outside of that 2.5 minutes, because I know that was part of a whole lesson that was filmed, right? So every lesson may be like that. And I'm not even commenting whether that's good or bad. It's brilliant. If the kids are happy and the parents are happy and the teacher's happy and the kids are learning and everything's done, brilliant, in my opinion. But I'm just interested in that other side of it. Of maybe it's because I can't do it. I can't. I told you this before. I said scripts and stuff like that. I just can't buy into it. I think that's just me. I don't actually have any problem with anyone else that uses scripts. I would never say don't use it. You know, you're an idiot for using the script, like it whatever, right? No, like if someone wants to, then and it helps them, then use it. But I personally couldn't because I struggle with that idea of that performative nature of it, like getting that sort of back and forth with the kids of like, say yes and everyone shouts yes, say no and everyone shouts no, well done everyone, shout well done, well done, is it 5 minutes till break, everyone says yes, it's 5 minutes till break, fantastic. You know, I would feel more like I was in like a West End production, if that makes sense, than a classroom for me personally. And that's not to say anyone else wouldn't, because that might be their natural way of doing teaching, right? But my way has always been different to that, and so it's hard for me to sort of understand the to enjoy it in that way or see it in that way, let's say, because I'm obviously going to see it through the eyes I see it through. Does that make any sense? Probably not.
Yeah, it does. And I agree. So I don't think I could ever be a teacher who follows a script to a T. But I think that's because I teach sociology and psychology. So there's a lot of debate in sociology. I can't just say, right, tell me if this is a yes or a no answer, because there's always going to be someone in the room that has a criticism or something to say in response to what's already been said. But also, I think with script teaching, I find that you've mentioned it already, it's a little bit robotic and very mechanical. So I think it also, to an extent, takes away from that almost human element of it. Because, again, critical thinking skills and the skills that we're trying to give to the students that we teach, I feel like we risk not giving them those skills. And especially because I teach predominantly sixth form students, I wouldn't be able to do as scripted lessons because we're trying to prepare them for university, where in their seminars they'll be challenged to kind of come up with ideas, and in their lectures it will be very similar to the lesson in the video, where you're sat there in silence, looking at the board, listening to what the lecturer is saying, and then that seminar is where you then get to discuss what you've just been taught. At the same time, I think the times where I have kind of like used a semi-structured script, I think they've worked well. But again, that was dependent on the context that I was teaching in. So I think there's two ways to see it. It either works or it doesn't. But then also, again, like experience wise, some people might find scripted lessons a little bit easier. Some
Yeah,
people might find what's it called? Almost like door handle planning a little bit easier, where because they know the context of the group that they're teaching, they don't need to have a full script in front of them. Does that make any sense?
absolutely. But it also comes back to what I said earlier around behavior, because the behavior in that classroom is, certainly from a compliance point of view, excellent, right? As in, if that's what those students are behaving like on the day-to-day, lesson to lesson, the behavior from a compliance point of view is excellent. In other areas, we don't know, but we certainly know that that classroom is calm, structured, and the behavior is, you know, people will feel safe in that classroom. Now, that has to be something of immense value in the current context with which many teachers and students are teaching in. Now, if that structure, technique, approach has a better chance of achieving that, this sort of comes back to what I said earlier on, but if it has a better chance of achieving that, then I look at that quite positively, because you know that's what many teachers are even leaving the profession for. You know, I mean, for example, if you said to a teacher, right, okay, listen, right, you're on the verge of leaving the profession because of behavior. You're struggling to, you know, you've got very large class sizes, the behavior's all over the place. You are a good teacher, but your weakness maybe is on the behavior side. And if you said to them, look, you're gonna go and teach in Pritesh's school, you're going to teach his class's science. He's not going to be in the room, but it's going to be set up in exactly the same way. I think that teacher would have a better chance of staying in the profession. And I think that the students and parents would be happy in that the kids in there are safe. Now, does that relate to the best way to teach? No. Does that relate to, incredible sort of all the different range of learning experiences a student can have and the way in which? No, it doesn't really. We're just talking about safety, compliance, and behavior that is good for the majority. And that's where I see that sort of having real value. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think this is the thing. It's like the idea of compliance. I think this is a thing that's come up in slightly more recently within like the last 5 years, I want to say. I think the changes that the education system has kind of like undergone, especially post COVID, is a lot of we need students to comply. They need to be able to do this, and this. But also the fact that we have a retention crisis in teaching as well. I think it does boil down to, like you said, predominantly behavior, because I think there's this element of students not enjoying being in the classroom as much anymore. And I think it is genuinely because of what's been happening over like the last almost half a decade in terms of COVID and whatnot. At the same time, do we need compliance in that manner that we saw it in the video to make sure that everybody's learning and everybody's engaged in the lesson? Maybe not. But I do agree that if someone that was new to the profession went and taught in that context, with that script, with that group or a similar group, they'd probably stay in the profession for a lot longer. But also, it would probably reignite the spark that they first had when they started to train, for example. And I think that's one of the things that's probably being lost right now, kind of like that spark that a lot of teachers have. And I think videos like that can show, if it was a little bit more similar to this, or if it looked a little bit like this contextually, you might actually be able to enjoy teaching a little bit more. Does that make sense?
100%. I think that this is where, though, it's interesting because, I said about importing a teacher in there, right, into a context like that, okay? You could import a absolutely fresh teacher into an environment like that, and they would have if they had some ability as a teacher, I think they would have a pretty good chance of being able to have a good go within that context. And because of those structures and routines and systems that have been set up, they would have a good chance of having behavior that was similar to what is shown in that clip, right? But
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, but if you, and this sort of mirrors my own career, it was like, there wasn't necessarily that structure or systematic sort of scripts, routines, and sort of minute by minute like system of doing things. When I started my career, it was like you had your set of wider, I guess, broader stroke techniques, and you persisted with them, right? And it was really hard work. And then you were sort of hoping that over time you would develop relationships. And I sort of hate using that word because it's been misconstrued so much in education, but whatever. You would develop relationships that allowed for a very authentic classroom experience, but without sort of any of them, not any, but certainly without scripts or without sort of any sort of intense minute by minute wraparound of how that operated. Or there was a sense of it was embedded, and therefore as it got embedded you could loosen your grip a little bit and things sort of worked. And that's where you get those sort of relationships building, because you're having those genuine authentic interactions, conversations with students. And maybe not. I mean, listen, you know, it wasn't like Robin Williams in that movie or anything like that. But I mean, you know, you are starting to. There's a certain level of freedom that maybe develops, and that same teacher within that first year or 2 years even may quit the profession or may struggle a lot, because those things aren't in place. But if they can sort of get through that period and start to build further, then, you know, I don't know, you then have a chance of building something maybe a bit different. I'm not necessarily going to say better, because I think that would be a bit arrogant and a bit sort of presumptive, because who really knows that, because every context is different. But, you know, certainly it would give you a chance of building something different. But I find the whole thing really, really interesting, though. I find it really, really interesting.
I find it quite interesting too as well. But like you said, I think historically, and I saw it more with my teachers, because obviously I did my teacher training in like 2019, 2020. They didn't have as many pedagogical tools as we have, I think. And I think when I was being taught by those teachers, it was a lot of, I'm going to try this technique and see if it works. If it doesn't, at least I have strong relationships with the students that I'm teaching. So behavior wise, because they knew every single one of us and kind of like on our all of our contexts and kind of like where we came from, our behavior was all right. So even if it wasn't like the most rigorously structured lesson, we still left knowing the content that we needed to know. Now, I'm not going to say that like my lessons are perfect. I know that they're not, but I'd say that for the context of what I work in, I think they're good lessons. I've obviously got some improvement to make, because I feel like you learn something new every day, so you have something new to implement. But I also know that at the same time, because I know the students that I teach and I kind of like know their contextual backgrounds and where they're coming from, the behavior side leans into the misconstrued relationship side, which I'd probably call more of a rapport with the kids that I teach, which then helps to get through the lessons. But then where it does need to be like quite rigorous and quite routiny, like with year 12, for example, it is like clockwork. I tell you to do this, you do this. That works, but it might not work for the year 13s that I teach, because they're a little bit older, but also they don't need as rigorous routines, because they know each other, they know me, our relationship is quite good in terms of the context that we're working in. But again, like I think back in the day, it was very like relationships, and then you guys figure out kind of like what works for your groups. Whereas now, like we saw in that video, is very, we'll tell you how to teach it. You teach it like that. Obviously, get to know who you're teaching, but try and stick to what we've given you as much as you possibly can.
But what does that mean? Are you saying that's a good thing or bad thing?
I think I'm like on the fence a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think
No, sure.
I think I'll be on the fence until maybe I have a little bit more experience.
No, sure.
Because I'm quite new to teaching still. I wouldn't say I'm an experienced teacher, because I'm in my 5th year post training. But I'm on the fence because I know there's elements from both sides that work really well. I just know that because of how I am personally as a teacher, I know that rigorous routines wouldn't be as effective in my classroom, because I'm quite big on relationships and getting to know who I'm teaching, but also having a routine that's not so rigorous that, like, say we're doing a discussion task and it's going to run 5 minutes over. That's not the end of the world for me. But then there might be another lesson where we're doing essay technique, and I'm like, we need to keep it to the second or to the minute, and I need that routine.
This is it. It's the degree of freedom within what you're doing as a teacher, as students, and so on. And I guess you've got a sliding scale, haven't you? Because at one end, you've got like complete sort of, you know, there's some independent schools in the UK where I know that they are absolutely like, not do whatever. They're very liberal on the sort of you know, it's a very sort of play based approach, experiment based approach. Everybody sort of does their own thing. And then on the other end of the scale, you've got something that's much more, as you use the word, rigorous, timed, structured, scripts, routines. You know, there's two ends to the spectrum that we're maybe talking about. And there's probably a lot of people, and I would probably put myself in this, who are basically in the middle. But I guess what the middle ground people might ask is this new? Is this anything new? Is it better? I mean, both ends of the spectrum here. I mean, certainly the dominant trend is maybe something more like what we're seeing in the video, right? At the moment, that's more the trend of this is the creme de la creme. This is what we should be aiming at. But, you know, that could change. In 10 years' time, it might go back to what it was in 2007 when, you know, the whole inquiry, discovery, learning thing was the creme de la creme. And that was what everybody, right? So maybe it does go in cycles and all that jazz. But I think people understandably asking questions like, is this the best way to teach? Because some, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. On teacher work, again, we talked about behavior, and we said that might be a good approach on behavior, or not a good approach, but an approach that may lend itself to teachers finding things a little bit easier when it comes to behavior. And also on teacher workload. You see, if somebody says to me, right, Tom, because I'm teaching tomorrow, right? And I've sort of spent time planning those lessons. Now, I am by no means suggesting that some teachers don't plan. However, in some schools, there is more of here is a PowerPoint. It has 8 slides on it. Here is a script that you need to use to teach around that PowerPoint. And at 10 minutes in, they will do a written task. Here are the questions for the written task. Simple comprehension questions, say. And then 5 minutes discussion, and then a 10-minute quiz at the end. And that is every lesson. You have it all there. It's on PowerPoint. It's boxed off. And if you follow this to the letter, that is good teaching. Now, as I say, that's not necessarily how I've been trained or taught or experienced good teaching from my perspective. But there will be many out there who will say, no. This is a model using research-backed techniques that is structured in a way that works in teaching today, that is using the latest in cognitive science approaches. It has all the different elements you'd want in a lesson, and it's more audited, because these PowerPoints are coming from us, if you like. You know, it's a collective thing rather than teacher goes away and makes something themselves. So it's got a better chance of being more being better in that respect. So I understand that argument. It's just that I don't know. I find it sort of, I mean, I've talked about lesson planning before in the past, about like the dying art of lesson planning, whatever that is. Now, listen, I came back to the point of teacher workload. What I've just described, it is easier on teacher workload. Because if somebody gives me a script and a PowerPoint and expects me to use it and expects the behavior of students to be good, or at the very least compliant, while I'm, in inverted commas, going through this lesson, then there is going to be a significant reduction in my workload, because I'm not going to think about it as much as I actually do now. I'm going to go, here it is. All I have to do is pick this up and deliver it in a way that is sort of within this approach and ticks the boxes of this approach. And it will be good as a result of that. And I will greatly reduce my workload, because I'll spend like 20%, 10% of the time that I would normally do planning. That's a very, of course, cynical view. because I'm sure there'll be other people say, no, hang on, the equal amount of thought goes into this as to what you've just described. But I just think it's very interesting. We've got Noreen. Noreen, do you want to throw a thought in?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I was just busy with family, but I just had to join in for a second to say my penny's worth. Um, when you said earlier on, is this something new? It might not be new. It's not new. It is very old, almost as old as
Yeah.
teaching is. Uh, but why is but there was a time when it was frowned upon. Ofsted marked you down if you as a teacher
Oh,
were
agreed.
talking.
Agreed.
I know that I know of a teacher who had a bad Ofsted when they used to grade individual
Yeah.
teachers
Yeah.
because there was no student talk in their class, and they forgot they did not mention that what the class was doing was setting a test. They expected them to still be talking while doing a test. So there was a time when teachers were expected only to talk, 5% of the time, or 10% of the time, and not talk at all. And therefore, it may be new. Not It's not new, but people need reminding that this is a technique which works. It's not the best technique, but it's better than the rest.
Well, that's what I was saying earlier, Noreen, in terms of it's a structure and an approach and a set of techniques that sort of there'll be many out there who unless you have the perfect class, and someone can say to you as a teacher, when you walk in there, the behavior is going to be just fantastic. And when that is the case, you in this theoretical world, right? You as a teacher would have absolute carte blanche on the approach that you took with that, because as long as you were a professional and you knew, it would work, wouldn't it? Because you know, whatever approach you use. But obviously the reality is that in many cases that is not the case. So I understand the argument that
Yeah, but Tom, if that were the case, if there was a similar class where behavior was perfect and you had carte blanche to do whatever you want to, project followed through tells us that DI would work better. Yeah. Sorry.
again though, I don't. DI as a part of something, of course, works. I don't. I would. I mean, direct instruction is a technique that I'm sure. Well, I would like to think that the majority of teachers are either use or at the very least are on board with as a technique within a toolbox of techniques. But to say it's the best,
I
I
didn't
know
say
what
it's the
I know.
best. That's what I said. That's what I said. I said it may not be the best, but it's better than the rest.
Again, and I suppose that's where if somebody, I guess, has a conversation about it, sometimes the response is, well, look at the evidence, right? So you have a discussion, you say, well, actually, I think this, and this. And the response might be, yeah, but it is the best, look at the evidence. Well, again, we then get into a conversation about the veracity, the quality, the dependability of educational research and what educational research means and how it's been formulated, decided, collected, audited, what it actually is. However, of course, there will be many out there who will say, well, listen, we have what we have. This is what the evidence says. It's the best. I can only speak, this is only me speaking, Noreen, really. In an ideal world, teaching world, I would have a classroom where the learners led the learning and it was very sort of inquiry based, discovery led, and seminary, like a university seminar. Is that the way I teach? Generally, no. But in this sort of panacea world, if that was possible, I think that would be great, because I would. Whereas in that panacea world, are you saying that you would still sort of want to see that approach? you would still use that approach in that Panacea world. So the kids are absolutely incredible. You know what they're going to do. Are you saying you would still go along with all those approaches and that with the scripting and all that in that context?
I would, and I did.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Because
Each to one's own. Each to one's own.
No, exactly. It's when I was taught abroad, like Zeenat was saying, and the expectation there was you will behave, otherwise your parents will get to know about it, and parents always backed the school. They would never doubt the teacher. If the teacher phoned home that your child misbehaved, it would no parent ever said, well, that couldn't be my child, you must have done something to wind them up. The child got it in the neck from the parents, well, so to speak. So the behavior was excellent. I still used DI, and uh, and as far as inquiry-based learning is concerned, I used a bit of that, but only when I was teaching at university, when my students did have the background knowledge to sort of start exploring things. But when I was teaching at schools, I didn't.
Yeah.
Right. With that, I need to get back to my family. Like I said, I was so interesting.
No, it's fair enough.
I couldn't help. I'll keep listening, but I'll have to beg leave and go.
Yeah.
But really good
to
one
hear you,
today,
Noreen.
Tom.
Yeah, good to hear you.
Thank you.
Zeenat, any thoughts on that from what Noreen said?
I think so. I want to pick up on the thing about teaching abroad. So when I taught abroad in the Middle East, that was a very like inquiry-based learning environment. And that was because it's almost like because this new generation of children really like using iPads and using AI and devices and all this other malarkey that they love. The school was basically shifting towards, instead of teachers doing the work, students would do the work on their own. Whereas like teachers were in the room to just facilitate them doing the tasks. And it wasn't as much direct instruction as it is in other contexts. So like in that context, you'd have like a slide on the board and it would tell them what they need to do with QR codes and links to various things that they can use. But then you'd have to upload your PowerPoint onto Teams the evening before so that they could access it before the lesson had even started. But then at the same time, to pick up on like the point of inquiry-based learning at university, in the lesson before, you'd set them homework to go and research the thing that they're going to make something about in the lesson that you have with them next. Obviously, I don't do as much inquiry-based learning here in the UK because for various reasons, I don't think it would work as well here. But also, again, like going back to routine and rigor, I feel like it disrupts what students are getting on with. It's like here, it's a really big mixture of directed instruction, teacher talk, student talk, independent task, let's do a group discussion, mini whiteboard, and everything else that you kind of like need to make a lesson work in inverted commas. But also, it's almost like ownership of their own learning as well, because you're giving them back that time to sit and do something on their own. It's not just you kind of like lecturing them as much as letting them off on their own, kind of like doing their own thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, absolutely. Yeah. Listen, we're coming towards the end of our little show, so I'll just give a little shout out to our sponsors tonight. Again, we've got John Catt Educational, our lovely John Catt, who always support Teachers Talk Radio and help us to produce these shows and conversations. So massive shout out to John Catt. Visit johncattbookshop.com. Explore the full range of titles. Get 20% off any order that you make on the John Catt website by using JCTTR2425. That's JCTTR2425 on the checkout. We've also got USA Study, who are supporting our shows. If any of your students or anybody you know actually is considering studying in the USA post-18, then USA Study can help you with scholarships, applications, programs, picking the universities, everything, departure. If you visit usastudy.co.uk, that's usastudy.co.uk, then check it out. find out more. And of course, finally, we have Teachers Talk Connect coming up on the 1st of March in Manchester. If you happen to be around, you've got Kate Jones, Lee Parkinson, Vic Goddard, and 50 other speakers in our biggest free event ever on the 1st of March 2025. If you haven't got a ticket yet, what the hell are you waiting for? Like, seriously, get over to the Teachers Talk Radio website, ttradio.org. Get yourself a ticket. It's going to be great. It would be lovely to meet you all there. Obviously, I know we've got people like Rebecca who is listening in the USA. Sorry, Rebecca, but maybe you can fly in next year if we plan it further in advance, you know. Come along to a TTR event. So it's been a great conversation. I don't think we've actually reached any answer, Zina, in our conversation, but I certainly think we've gone through a lot of the key sort of discussion points on the back of that, which I think is really good.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So thanks everybody for tuning in. It's been a really, really good chat. Obviously share the link. We'll post this as a podcast anyway. And also 9 o'clock tonight, Ray and Leanne are on. That's on YouTube. So if you just search Teachers Talk Radio on YouTube, it'll also be streamed on X. And they're talking about what other professionals we need in schools. So tune in for that. It's at 9 p.m. UK time. And I'll be back next Monday at 6. Thanks to Nathan as well for administrating the show in the background, and of course Zina for joining in as a guest. Cheers everybody and take care.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.